Okay, welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock,
And I'm Darren Lundberg.
and this episode we'll be discussing Dirty Harry, Don Siegel film, 1971, starring Clint Eastwood. Darren, it's our first Clint Eastwood movie. We haven't
Well,
done one yet.
right. Well, we hadn't done a Star Wars until episode 100,
That's
right?
true.
So there's always the first time. And there's James Bond, like what, episode 98, 97. So
Yeah, yeah.
there's a lot of, we talk about it a lot. It's like, and I'm going to keep mentioning this. When we first started Nostalgia Cast, it was like, let's pick obscure movies that we watched and liked when we were kids. And then we kind of seeded it. You know what? Nostalgia isn't just about that. Nostalgia is also about the movies that you love, the movies that affect you, and like how you change over time.
Right, right.
So there are so many things that we haven't covered yet that I guess we're now open to. I don't know if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Well, we're branching out,
Yeah.
we're evolving. So,
Nostalgia is just a huge,
yeah.
a wide kind of topic. So,
Well, I picked Dirty Harry because I had seen bits and pieces, but never the whole thing all the way through. And so I
mm,
wanted to kind of finally get a full watch. And so that's why I picked it. Plus, Clint Eastwood.
yeah.
And plus, I have tons of memories growing up, sitting with my dad and watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Pale Rider, or what else? Outlaw Josie Wales. We'd watch these movies together. And I'm not quite sure we watched Dirty Harry together. I don't think we did.
Mhm.
But I was familiar with it. I knew the iconic scenes, with the bank robber, and at the end where he gives that, that famous iconic line. So not having seen it all the way through in one sitting, I decided to finally do it. And I'm glad I did. It was a fun movie. I enjoyed myself. I do have some issues, and we will discuss them.
Right.
But that's my history. I really didn't see it all the way through until now. So go ahead and tell me what your history is with the movie.
Well, the Dirty Harry movies are very interesting because they were accused by Pauline Kael and Roger Ebert, I believe, of being fascist films about one law, like if you follow my law or and that's it, right? My law or no law, that kind of thing. And so it's weird that they spun. It was such a big hit, and then it spun like three other sequels. What is it? It's like no four.
Magnum
Maybe
Force,
Magna Force Enforcer,
the
Sudden
Deadpool.
Impact. Is Sudden
Oh,
Impact one of them?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and then the Deadpool. And the it's weird because I think the first Dirty Harry movie I ever saw was the Deadpool. And I did obviously you don't know who Harry Callahan is. You don't know his whole hit. I think again it came out in '87. I watched it when I was just maybe 10 or 12, something like that. I think my grandpa was watching it. I didn't know who Dirty Harry was or what impact that he had. And then again, I think it was during the '90s. Dirty Harry was just another one of those homework movies that you're like, well, it's an action movie from the '70s, made a big dent. Obviously, it was huge for Clint Eastwood's career. He moved on from being the cowboy in the West Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, Hell Rider, and he became this was his next big signature role, and it wasn't even like his. I think Paul Newman was offered, Frank Sinatra was offered, but the
Hmm.
fact that Eastwood took this and made it his own was obviously a big thing, and I don't think anybody else could have played it like this, and that's what really gave him another kind of career other than being in Western. So I didn't know that any of the impact. So watching it in the '90s, that's when I really became. And again, Dirty Harry is a much different movie from the Deadpool. It just seems like filmmaking wise or anything else wise. So are you
Yeah.
familiar with the sequels? I don't. I know I've seen them, but I don't really remember a lot of them except for the
Yeah, I
part
I
where he blows up
remember.
a guy with a rocket launcher.
Yeah.
So,
I remember pieces from Magnum Force with the cops. I think
mhm.
it's Magnum Force.
Yep.
But yeah, I
Who are
mean,
dressed like fascist soldiers. They're dressed in
yeah.
all black with helmets. So they take it's like they go, oh, you think that's fascist? Here we go. We'll show you what's really fascist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
And
just
didn't
really
they
interesting.
didn't they kill like a movie critic or something like that in
Yeah,
there?
they killed Pauline Kael in the Deadpool, like a version of her. It's obviously it's
Yeah,
obviously Pauline Kael.
that's funny.
I think she even got a kick out of that. You know what's funny? It's funny that Pauline Kael, like we talked about her in F for Fake, how she ended up being a fraud after she accused Wells of being a
Oh
fraud,
yeah.
and people obviously like calling this movie a fascist. It's funny because her review very very famous. Eastwood seems to think that, oh, she just latched onto something that made her got her attention, right? And it's interesting that that word was applied to the movie, but then she also says in her review that it's a very well made action thriller. Like you can't deny that it's a well made, well put together picture. And so the fact that I don't agree with Pauline Kael a lot of the time, but I think she's my favorite critic just because she's so, and she's was she's a fraud in some ways, right? But the
Hmm.
way that she writes is so, I wish I could write like that. I wish I could write from the id like she does and be so refreshing. And that's why I like her. Not that I don't agree with her, because I think that's kind of boring if we agree on everything all the time. So
Yeah.
that's not it. I just think it's funny that we keep talking about Pauline Kael and kind of in a negative light, but I still love reading her stuff.
Yeah. I remembered that I also watched Every Which Way But Loose, the monkey
Yeah.
one. So I
Of
have
course.
seen the.
Yep. Yep.
Um, real quick, let's talk about Don Siegel. I know he also did a couple other Clint Eastwood movies. He did Escape from Alcatraz, which I also watched with my dad.
Mm.
And by the way, I love that one. Like,
Okay.
I get
That's
so
good.
into that movie. Whenever it's on, I have to watch it. Like, it's just so intriguing and just kind of
Yeah.
engages me right away. And I love just the intensity of that movie, even though it's kind of a subdued, quiet movie. It's just like it just grabs you.
Hmm.
Um, Dirty Harry does it's interesting. It does that at times, but not as well as maybe Alcatraz does or some other ones.
Yeah. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Just
Okay.
having Chris Scalzo on our last episode for Superman. He did couldn't announce it during our episode because they just started recording, but they are covering Invasion of the Body Snatchers as
Oh,
a
okay.
kind of a series, like the remakes, kind of spin-offs, that kind of thing. So I think it's kind of a cool seed into Don Siegel that we talked Superman with him, and then they're doing Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which he was Jewish. He was very leftist. He leaned to the left wing, that kind of thing. But he didn't. He says that he didn't put that stuff in his movies on purpose. He just says that I'm just here for the paycheck, right? And I think he did a good job of, just like Invasion of the Body Snatchers is very light in its feet, even though it's intense, because it's a Red Scare. It can be a Red Scare metaphor, a McCarthy era kind of communist screed kind of thing. But that's all baked into the story. And Siegel doesn't really comment on that during the movie. He just wanted to make a good, solid kind of horror thriller. And I think
Okay.
that's what makes him good, because there's no scene of Kevin McCarthy in the movie looking at the camera and going, oh, this is a red scare. There's nothing that heavy handed. And you can read whatever else you want into the movie. So I think he's a very good, like you said, Escape from Alcatraz is a very good, solid kind of thriller. And it works its magic on you.
Okay. I do want to talk about Clint Eastwood, but we can kind of save some of that for the end. But I mean, I think we can agree that this made Clint Eastwood. I mean, I know he had the westerns and everything, but I
Yeah.
think this just kind of catapulted his career into what it became and everything.
Well, this is
Because
him being
he
a
is
man
Dirty
for all
Harry.
seasons. Yeah, yeah. He can do anything, not just westerns, right? He can
Right.
be the
Right.
action star. He can start directing. Right? I think he
Yeah.
was directing Play Misty for me when they offered him this role.
Yeah.
So you're right. Like he had the Leone movies, obviously, but this is what made him like, oh, he can do anything he wants. It's
Yeah.
not just this certain kind of movie that we expect.
And by the way, as a side note, today is his birthday.
That's right. We're
So,
recording on his birthday. Isn't that funny?
yeah,
I tweeted
94
that
years
at you.
old now.
Yeah, yeah. I was like,
94.
hey, we're recording this on Clint Eastwood's birthday. Isn't that weird? So I don't know.
Yeah.
Just thought it was a kind of a fun.
And he's still making movies. So
Yeah,
it's amazing.
man, workhorse.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a couple things that stood out to me while I was watching it. Um, I know it was loosely based on the Zodiac killer,
Yeah.
and another killer that they took from. Um, I thought it was interesting because we talked about David Fincher and the movie Zodiac a little bit on our podcast, and we
Mhm.
both really like that movie. And so to see the kind of similarities was fun for me. I was like, okay, they hinted at it, but they didn't go all the way with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like kind of like put little things like the note that was in there, the maybe the symbol on his belt
Right.
instead of on his chest, um, and the school bus with the kids. That kind of thing. It was like little things kept happening. That was like hinted that it was a Zodiac.
Yeah.
Um, takeaway.
That letter that Callahan finds, I think it's verbatim from one of the Zodiac letters, except they just
Okay.
change a couple things. And
Who
again,
was who was the other
Zodiac,
killer?
Scorpio. The guy's name was Gary Stephen Christ. He wasn't really a killer. He worked with let's see, I want to find her name. They kidnapped an heiress, Barbara Jane Mackey. He and his I think his girlfriend. Anyway, so they kidnapped this girl, Barbara, and they buried her in a shallow grave in a ventilated kind of coffin or a box. And then he held her for ransom. So there's a pipe that let out and she could breathe and she could like eat and drink stuff like that. And then there's a, like in the movie, like they were able to piece together, oh, he lived here or he knew this person or they latched onto this guy because he actually made ventilated boxes. So they're able to kind of find him because of that evidence put together. So they found Barbara, and she was safe. Like I think she was only underground for maybe 3 days, something like that. And she
Okay.
knew that she was going to be reunited. She just kept a positive attitude, which is great. But then this guy, Gary, Chris was, I think he was sentenced to life in prison. So kidnapping is that much of even though she didn't die, it's pretty much of a major kind of crime. And I think he was paroled after 10 years. But again, it's funny. I don't know. The Scorpio killer seems like he's all over the place. You know what I mean? He seems to have
Yeah.
different MOs for different things. He just seems to be committing crimes on a whim, that kind of thing. So you're right. It's not really the Zodiac killer, even though they take some stuff from that. And you're right. In Zodiac, it was really fun watching Dirty Harry get kind of brought into that and kind of looked at. And the Mark Ruffalo
Yeah.
character is kind of based on
Yeah.
it and not happy about it. So that's all that stuff is really fun in Zodiac.
Yeah. Okay, one thing I had to mention, because this kept happening as I was watching the movie, and it has to do with cinematography and the way the movie is lit. Whenever they are indoors or they're outside, it's very bright. It's just like, you can see everything's going on, it's very bright. And then when he's at night and he's walking around in the dark, it's just extremely dark. And it's hard to watch what's happening. It's hard to even like recognize the people on the screen or the locations or what's going on. And I wasn't quite sure if that was on purpose, like they wanted that huge contrast of light and dark, or if it was because they didn't know how to light a night scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's Bruce Surtees doing the cinematography. I just want to read a few of his. He did Play Misty for Me for Eastwood, High Plains Drifter, Outlaw Josie Wales. He did The Shootist with John Wayne, Escape from Alcatraz, like we mentioned. Risky Business. I'm just running through the
Okay.
list here. Beverly Hills Cop, License to Drive. That's funny. And then kind of in the 2000s, I guess American Tragedy. Nothing really. I think he stopped working in 2002, but he's done a lot of really good work. And Beverly Hills Cop isn't shot like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Beverly
was
Hills
gonna
Cop
say
is,
you can see they're at night a lot and you can see what's happening.
yeah,
That's the point I'm trying to make is you have to know how to light night scenes. You can't just
right.
not light it. You have to light it so we can see what's happening, even though it's dark.
I think a lot of 70s movies, if we were to watch a lot of them do that. I don't know if it's a stylistic choice or just because that was the aesthetics available at the time. You said that it was maybe light and dark, which, yeah, that makes sense. But like, also, how come I can't see things when it's dark? How come I'm kind of squinting at things when it's light? So you're right. It does have that. If if you're thinking about it too much, that's a problem. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
if it's the aesthetic, and sure, whatever. But if you're constantly like, why is that so bright, and it's taking you away from the story, I think that's where it becomes kind of problematic.
Yeah.
But you talked
Um,
about like the scene where he's creeping in the alleyway following that guy he thinks, and he's looking at, you can't see anything, and you
yeah.
just see his head
Yeah.
pop up like, oh, okay, what am I supposed to be looking at?
I mean, there's moments where they're having the shootouts back and forth where like, light flashes and you can kind
Yeah,
of see a little bit of what's going on. But most of the time, like when he's following them in the like the woods or whatever, and he actually stabs him in the leg and all that stuff, and he's limping away. Again, it's really dark and you can't really tell what's going on.
yeah.
Um, but anyway, I just thought that was interesting that that kept happening.
You're right. But then you'd also have, like you talked about, that first shootout on the rooftop where they've got the neon lights and the Scorpio shoots it out and it keeps giving you these like strobe light effect. I thought that was very effective. Like, again, you're talking 70s filmmaking. I've got some issues with 70s filmmaking because it's all these weird rack zooms and the camera, it just doesn't feel confident. But that's, and almost every 70s movie it does that, right? But that, when that first fights, that first shootout, I was like, oh, like I was in. I was like, oh, that's cool. That's really cool how that shot, and it was exciting.
Yeah. I will say this too. There were a lot of camera bumps, even though they're trying to do these really,
Yeah,
fluid movements and like, dolly shots or whatever. The camera would bump and it would shift a little bit, just a little bit.
yeah,
Not much, but it was like enough that you kind of go, was that a camera bump?
yeah.
Like, what happened there, guys?
We might be talking out of turn. I don't know if cinema verite was quite the thing yet, but it's weird that they're doing these like really confident kind of pans, but then they'd also have like the shaky stuff. So I don't
Hmm.
know if they're going for a certain kind of cinema verite effect. It's too smooth in a lot of places to do that. So the
Yeah.
smoothness with the bumpiness, it kind of throws that off. But again, it's so strange that that's kind of the 70s thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a 70s style. There is one shot in the movie we have to talk about.
Okay.
and that is when he's in the football field, and Harry shoots him, and he goes down. Scorpio goes down, and when he walks up to him and steps on his leg, and the camera it's like pulls back really quick, and it just keeps on going. And pulls off into space. Um, it's I think it's effective to a point. I think when you first see it, it's kind of jarring. You're like,
Mhm.
what's going on? Why are we suddenly flying away off into space?
Yeah.
But if you're looking at, what they're trying to do in that moment, then I guess it's effective, and it's a cool shot. It's not done poorly. It's a cool shot. And the music there helps, add to it, but still, it's just a little bit off-putting. You're like, huh, what just happened? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It kind of takes you a minute to kind of come back to, okay, you know what I'm saying? What do you think about that shot? Any thoughts?
Okay. Well, this is this is going to seek into something kind of deep, because the movie again, and again, we're going to take kind of I want to get back to this point to talk about the shot because I think it's
Okay.
very impactful. But to lead up to that, the movie, some of the notes that I have, like when you, first of all, I think it's interesting that it starts off with like, we'd like to pay tribute to all the cops that died. And it's showing you like years and years and years of all these cops and police officers that died in the line of duty. And then it quickly juxtaposes to a shot of Scorpio looking through the sniper rifle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was kind of chilling, like who's, matching that with all these officers who've been slain. So
Mm-hmm.
it's telling you a little bit of where it's going to head, but then the movie, like I said, a lot of the notes are like, oh, this is like a mundane kind of police procedural, right? Like it's just about, it has all the cliches. I don't know if this is the movie that started all the cliches of the hero that doesn't play by the rules, and he's partnered with a guy who's like kind of what he's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? He's new, right? He hasn't
Yeah,
been like
yeah.
introduced.
He's
And
green.
he's
Yeah.
green. That's the color I was looking for. And then you've got the cops captain who's yelling at him, "You got to stay in line, Callahan," that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
there were scenes, like another thing I had was like, I like how the plot is basically about Callahan stopping this killer, but then it keeps breaking off to these mundane things. Like you see him at the bank robbery, which
Mm-hmm.
I thought was interesting because I always thought that the movie started with that bank robbery and that's how he's introduced. But it's not. You see him investigating things like that. And
Yeah.
he's told, Scorpio's holding the city for ransom. Let's just wait and we'll stall him. And so Callahan goes, I'll just go get a hot dog. I'll eat. And he stops this robbery from happening. And then it goes back to the case, and then they're looking with Chico, they're looking, the Renny Santoni character, they're looking for him at night, and then all of a sudden they get a call and it's the jumper, which I thought was interesting. I was like, isn't that Lethal Weapon?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Yep.
So they're using that. And then when Scorpio sends Callahan around San Francisco on that scavenger hunt, I also thought, oh, that's Ransom,
Yep.
like the Ron Howard movie. That's Die Hard with a Vengeance. How he's giving them this information on a phone, giving them riddles to have them go to this next place to give them the next clue, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, all those movies came after Dirty Harry, so maybe Dirty Harry did start the trend.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking. Like, I can't. There's the before and there's the after of these movies, right? Like, I think they become so entrenched and so baked into the zeitgeist that we just, oh, I don't know where this started. Just this always been there, but it's just interesting that
Yeah.
Dirty Harry kind of starts it. So again, it's this very mundane procedural trying to find this guy. Obviously, he's going to break the rules. He's part, that Chico's going to get shot at a certain point. It follows all those cliches, and it feels like it's building to that point where that's the end of the movie. They've got Scorpio. They've we've got a report that Scorpio went to a hospital and had his leg fixed. So they go to the hospital, and then the hospital guys, oh, I know him. He lives at the stadium, right? And so Callahan is able to, and they have another shootout, and uh, Scorpio runs off, and then he obviously gets shot in the leg, and that's where a typical movie would end. That's basically it. That's like an episode of a TV series, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you have the killer, you catch the killer, the end. But something interesting happens again. They've baked this into the movie. It's very interesting. The movie's been accused of being racist because the bank robbers are black, right? And so it's like, oh, is Harry Callahan racist? But then he gets shot in the leg. He goes to a doctor. The doctor's black, and the doctor's very civil with him. So it's like, I don't. It's playing both sides. And then later, when he's on the scavenger hunt, he's accosted by white muggers, right? So it's kind of equal opportunity. It's not just a particular sect. Like you don't see Hispanics, you don't see Asians, that kind of thing. It just seems like like I said, equal opportunity for crime, stuff like that. But it's baked in that Harry doesn't follow these rules and he's being chided by his captain. Now, when he steps on
Scorpio.
Scorpio's leg and the camera goes so far back, right? And the music is screeching, and it's just, it reminded me first of all of the again, something comes after it, of Taxi Driver. You know that part where Travis Bickle is on the phone with Sybil Shepherd, and the camera, because he's being rejected, it moves off him
Yeah.
because we don't want to be part, the cameras, it makes us subjective. We're like, oh, I don't want to watch this, so the camera
Yeah.
tries
Yeah.
to leave. But what the shot is doing that you've talked about, the movie Dirty Harry becomes a completely different movie from that point. It's no longer procedural because now Callahan goes to the DA's office, and all of a sudden the two DA guys are chiding him because you didn't, when
You didn't get a
Scorpio,
search warrant.
yeah,
Yeah.
you didn't get a search warrant for that. When Scorpio is shot, he's like, I have rights. I want a lawyer. And Harry's like, where's the girl? Where's the girl? Like, and he doesn't listen. He steps on his leg to get the confession out of him, which again is interesting because when he first gets that ransom note, the first thing Harry says is, she's already dead. He knows she's already dead. And yet, is, did he forget in the heat of things? Or is he purposely using his badge to be violent against Scorpio? It's hinting at that stuff.
Yeah.
So now when the camera pulls back, we are no longer part of it. We are no longer with Harry because, oh, it's
Okay.
something different now, right? When he's chided by the thing that made, again, everybody has their political leanings, right? You and I talked about this before we recorded because I want to be sure that we didn't go down the wrong path here. Okay. Everybody has left leanings, everybody has right leanings, everybody has different kind of attitudes of things. When this movie came out, this came out after the Summer of Love, this came out after the Escobar and Miranda thing, like the Miranda rights, because of that whole case. Like, you had to give criminals their due diligence, you had to give them their rights, you had to appoint them a lawyer, you could not just interrogate them and use violence against them. The criminals have rights, even though they're violating certain other people's rights. So there's that whole kind of rigmarole there, right? When this movie came out, and it was, like I said, it was after the Summer of Love in San Francisco. It's interesting that the movie takes place in San Francisco, where that took place. It's after the Miranda thing, where the liberals would watch this movie. Again, I'm we want to stand back from it. I'm not taking sides. I'm just telling you exactly what happened with the movie. Liberal minded people watched this and were just galled because Harry Callahan is taking the law in his own hands. He's kind of, it's my law or nothing else, right? That's where the fascist kind of leanings come in. That's where it can be, and you can pick that and take that as a kind of a focal point of the movie, or you can step back from it and just say, is it both sides of it? Because Harry and Scorpio are kind of the same. Would you agree? They're both pushing extremes that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Harry is breaking rules and he's
Yeah,
not following procedure. So, but then again, this guy is an evil man who's out, randomly killing people. So,
yeah,
Harry, even though he's breaking rules, he's on the right side. He's doing the right thing for the right reasons, even though it's,
yeah.
not following the law.
And Scorpio isn't given any backstory. He's just a psychopath, right?
Yeah,
There's no explanation. Again, something that I will say is, if you have a bad childhood and it causes you to go out and murder people, there's no excuse for that, right?
yeah,
It's like, you can end the cycle. You don't need to keep perpetuating it. So that's one thing. But the fact that they, again, they're the yin yang, right? He's tried it because he has rights, and the liberals watched this movie, and it was flabbergasting to them because the movie is purposely getting you angry. You've seen all the stuff that Scorpio is doing, right? You've seen him murder people. He's just raped and murdered a 14-year-old girl and put her in a pipe or a well, right? Buried her alive. You've seen him do all this horrible things, and now you have a scene where the cops like, you have to give him his rights. You know what I mean? And it's like,
yeah,
what? And people in the audience were getting upset. Liberals themselves were getting upset because the movie is guiding them to feel that way. That's something that Kale says in it. That's something that all these articles that I read saying, it's doing these horrible things, but it's also doing it professionally. As a film, it works, and it's getting you on Harry's side,
yeah.
even though it's wrong in some people's minds. And so the uproar that it caused is just mind-blowing, how this movie, and it was making hand over fist at the box office. So liberals and we're looking at it going, what, how come people aren't siding with our views? Like, it seems like they're rah-rahing and they're cheering these things on that we're so against. And it's just fascinating that's Gene Siskel, when he reviewed the movie, he gave it a 4-star review, 4 out of 4 stars, but he also called this a dangerous movie. Does that make sense?
Okay.
It's teaching you It's very professionally done, but it's also teaching some dangerous lessons. And I'm not saying I agree with either side. It ends with, so I thought it was interesting that, oh my gosh, how is that when he captures him and they let him go? And then Scorpio sees Callahan following me around. Obviously, he's still breaking the rules. He's not supposed to be doing that. It gets to the point where Scorpio goes to that man and has him beat him to a pulp so he can
Yeah.
blame it. And then I thought it was interesting that it kind of escalated. It doesn't really settle on that. All of a sudden, the next thing you see Scorpio do is he hijacks the bus, and then the city's basically okay with Callahan again. You know what I mean? Even though he called him out and said Callahan beat me up, it's police brutality, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's talking about the fascism stuff. It's talking about police brutality stuff. It's the liberal conservative kind of things that are butting heads. And again, Eastwood is conservative, but Siegel is liberal. And from what I understand, they never chatted about their politics on set.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, they just gave you this movie and they let you decide.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Well,
then and then you have the whole thing where Harry kills him at the end. And I like I said, it's both sidesing it because Harry, he's there's no way to stop this guy. This guy's gonna keep doing this. I've got to take the law in my own hands. When he does it, and again, the guy kidnaps a bus. He's beating up these kids, right?
yeah.
He knocks out the bus driver. He's horrible. He
Yeah.
gets to the lake or whatever, and he finds that kid fishing, and he holds him hostage, points a
Yeah.
gun at his head,
Yeah.
and Harry kills him. And when he's watching his body float away, Harry takes his badge. I think what that's saying, and there's different interpretations for it, because in the
Hmm.
original script of the novelization, he kept his badge. When he throws away his badge, I think that's because he's gone too far. The ends justified the means,
They were
but
going to take it anyway.
yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah.
At what cost was all this? And I think it's so, I don't know. Like I understand, I understand that it makes some people angry, you know what I mean? But I think that's what makes this stand the test of time, because it does stir up those emotions. We
Hmm.
talked about it with Clockwork Orange, where it's like, I want to feel something. This makes you feel something, whether it's
Yeah.
angry or not. And it's just interesting that I can't stand a Clockwork Orange, even though it's interesting. But this movie works,
Yeah.
you know, even though I
Well,
don't
what I
agree with
think
it.
is funny is you talk about it being like political and like having these issues. I didn't really even notice that while watching it. Like I mean I was on board with Harry from the very beginning. So so
Yeah.
I was like, okay, get the bad guy no matter what the cost. You know, that's kind of where I was at. And so I was just in it for that. And so when you mention these things, it's kind of like, oh really? Like I never thought of it that way. But that's because I wasn't looking for that.
Is that because, again, like we talked about, it's so ingrained that the cop's just going to do whatever he can? Because, and we've had how many characters, countless characters, but when this happened, I believe what was so mind-blowing is we're rooting for this guy that doesn't care about civil rights, right? He
Yeah.
doesn't care about, as long if you're breaking the law, it doesn't matter what you're doing, he'll kill you. You know what I mean? He'll bring you to justice. And I think it's,
Yeah.
you have to look at these things through context. What makes Dirty Harry such a mind blower is this was the first time we were siding with a guy who can be seen as a fascist, right? Who can be seen as a dictator, he doesn't take any shit from nobody, really, right?
Hmm.
That's what he is. And
Yeah.
we're so entrenched with that we're used to it, that when you put yourself in the context of the early 70s, again, this is before Watergate, there's a lot of disillusionment that's coming. It's like, wow, like I can't imagine a time where, you know what I mean? We can't imagine a time where wasn't a cop that would do this stuff, but this
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
mind blower for a lot
But
of
then
people.
again, you've got this really evil person doing these horrible things, and you want comeuppance for that character. You want to see him get his just desserts. So you're
Yeah,
like, come on, man, kill that guy already.
and
So
they set it up like
you're
you
rooting
have to
for it.
do things within the law, but is there also, does there have to be a guy? Does there have to be a Batman or a vigilante that has to take the law in his own hands to accomplish things? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's just, wow, what an what an interesting movie, and what it's tackling and how it tackles it. It's like we would have been happy with it just being a procedural, but the fact that it turns into something else is like,
yeah,
whoa, what is happening here?
yeah. Well, I definitely enjoyed it. I didn't really have any problems with it, other than the lighting issue.
Yeah,
But is there anything else that you wanted to bring up?
I mentioned a little bit. What do you think about the Lalo Schifrin score or
Oh,
score? I said score.
yes. Okay, that was an issue with me.
Right.
I really enjoyed some of the things they were doing. Like I didn't mind the percussive stuff with the drums, and that was intense, and it was like that was kind of getting me on board. And then it would have these moments where we would do this like James Bondy type things, like
Mm.
da na and I'd be like, what? Is this a James Bond film all of a
Yeah.
sudden? Um, but for the most part, it was good. And I also really appreciated it when they didn't have any score and it was just Harry following Scorpio, or it was just Harry doing, the stalking. And it was like, okay, good. Let me just kind of, settle in here and watch this and kind of go along with him. Because whenever they put score in those kind of moments, it's always kind of like, what are they trying to tell me here? I mean, I get the point of what he's doing. I just want to be a part of it. I don't need to be told, here's how you're supposed to feel now. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like sometimes that works, but I'm just saying it was nice to have that reprieve of not having to be told what to think and what to feel
yeah,
every second of the movie. But I mean, I don't know. Like I said, there were moments that were good, there were moments that were bad, but for the most part, it was okay.
yeah. Did you notice there, there's a part where the mayor is talking to Callan. I'm not going to get the dialogue right. I guess I should have pulled this up. And he's like, you can't have a repeat of what happened last time where you shot that guy. And Harry's like, well, when I see some guy chasing a woman down an alley with the intent to rape her, I shoot the bastard. That's my policy, right? That is a line from The Naked Gun. They take it later where the mayor again is telling Frank Drebin, I don't want a repeat of this stuff. He's like, well, when I see four guys dressed in togas trying to stab a guy in the middle of Central Park, I shoot the bastard. That's my policy. And the mayor goes, that was a production of Julius Caesar, you moron. You shot 5 actors, good ones. I just thought that was really funny when I was like, where do I know that dialogue from? And it's just funny being able to
Yeah,
put two and two together. But
yeah.
just again, just my word on Lalo Schifrin. I know that he's again very popular. He did like the Mission Impossible series. He wrote some of the themes that are still used today. He did the Amityville horror. He did Enter the Dragon. He did RoboCop 2, which I think is one of the worst movie scores I've ever heard because there's literally a part of the end where you can hear a choir chanting RoboCop like
Oh,
over and over again. I'm like, what are you doing, man? I'm just not a fan. I'm not a fan of the 70s music, the whack at you, that kind of thing. And it kind of
sure.
it's not as bad as Lady Hawk, the score for that, right? It's not quite that bad where it doesn't fit. It's just because that's very 70s and it's a lot of woodwinds,
Yeah,
percussion, that kind of stuff. That's just what happened. But and again, the filmmaking, it gets kind of blurry, it's too dark, it's too light a lot of the time. So yeah, that 70s stuff, you have the weird zooms, that kind of thing. But you also have Jaws that came out around this time. You have Star Wars, which came out. You have The Godfather. You know what I mean? You have movies that don't revel in that 70s stuff, that are very elegant all the way
yeah,
through. And that extends to the music score. Yeah, you've got the 70s stuff, but one of the reasons that John Williams sticks out for Star Wars and Jaws is he used the full orchestra. He didn't do just the tiny kind of, and that's what makes those movies feel more timeless because it
yeah.
doesn't stamp it in the 70s. I've just never been a Schifrin fan. I think his scores work for Rush Hour because that's the Rush Hour movies because that's
Did
kind of
he score the movie Shaft?
I think I don't know. I'm not seeing that, but yeah, you're
Or
right. It's
Wakachu,
like
Wakachu.
that exact same thing. So anyway, but yeah, you're right. It's just we could make we could make this episode a whole 2 hour 3 hour screed. We could take a political stance, we can get really angry, we can like make enemies, that kind of thing. That's not what I'm sorry, but that's not what we're about. Like we're just here to chat about a movie. I hope that us talking about the political leanings and liberals and conservatives, that kind of thing, I'm not citing anything because the movie both sides it if you really look at it and that's the thing too, like it's art can be like we talked about with Clockwork Orange, art can be distressing, it can
Yeah,
be dangerous, right? But the important thing is talking about it. Somebody can watch Dirty Harry and side with it and think that is the way it should be. That's dangerous because then what kind of rules are you breaking, what laws are you
yeah,
breaking?
yeah,
And it's dangerous because some people might take that irresponsibly, like we talked about with rape scenes last episode. I just think it's irresponsible to use those because somebody's going to be turned on by those. And if somebody who's a victim of sexual abuse watches a rape scene and it makes them uncomfortable or breaks down their defenses and shatters them, I don't think that's
yeah,
responsible. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
That's irresponsible.
I
I
don't
agree
want to
with that.
virtue signal, but it's just but that's art. Like it's we have to talk about this stuff. We
Yeah.
can't
Well,
just ignore the stuff that
art
makes us
imitates
uncomfortable.
life.
Yeah.
So, one other quick thing is there were some really weird, kind of random moments of nudity, and I was like, "What? Why? Why are we seeing that?" It was just kind of like out of place, seemed kind of weird. I know that's kind of a '70s thing too. It seems like, movies like Taxi Driver and what else? I mean, just other movies had these random scenes with like full on nudity, and you're like, huh, that's weird.
I'm not sure. I don't know if it dives into it. You have the, like we talked about, the scene where Callahan and Chico are driving through the city, and they drive through like the sex district, and Harry says, "Ah, I throw a net over all these guys, right?" But then, so we kind of avoid it, and then yeah, we when Harry's peeping, we have that weird shot. But then later, when after Scorpio's been freed, and you see Callahan fall, they go back to the sex district, and now Harry's like involving himself in that, so he's lowering himself to Scorpio's level, I guess you could say, but it doesn't really, it kind of hints at that. It doesn't really, so you're right, the random bits of nudity is like, oh, is that just where the 70s bar looked like, you know what I mean, a strip joint. So yeah, it's fine.
I mean, I guess they were pretty popular places back then. I mean, not
Right.
so much anymore, right? But
Yeah. Yeah, now that you can get anything free on the internet, it's a different question.
yes. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about? Some Clint Eastwood films? What do you
Yeah,
think?
since this was our, let me ask you, you talk, actually you talked about it already, you used to watch Clint Eastwood movies with your dad.
Yeah.
How big was Clint Eastwood for your dad?
Well, I knew he was a big fan of Westerns, and just so happens that Eastwood's in a lot of Westerns. So we ended up watching a lot of those. I think I've seen most of them. I mean, I know he's in a lot, but I always forget what the titles are. But I think my favorite is probably The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because we
Yeah.
watched that one the most. And so
Yeah.
that one's one I know the best. Josie Wells, I know that one.
Mhm.
And it's funny to say Paint Your Wagon because it's that musical one, but
Yep.
it's a lot different than the other ones. But I do remember watching the Every Which Way But Loose with the monkey,
Mhm.
and that always kind of stuck with me. I'm not sure why. Um, that's not a Western though.
No.
Anyway, then he kind of in the 90s he started making movies that were more my style, like Absolute Power, True Crime, In the Land of Fire, Perfect World, all these movies that he was Unforgiven, and I was like, wow, these are really good movies, and I kind of got excited about Clint Eastwood films. And then he's when he started like directing more and more and more, with Million Dollar Baby and Flags of Our Fathers and Letters of Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Richard Jewell yet. I don't think that's the
Okay.
one about the football or I forget what that one's about, but I haven't
Yeah.
seen it yet.
I don't
Oh,
care.
Gran Torino. I liked Gran Torino.
Yeah.
And then he did The Mule. I liked that one. I know there's one coming out called Juror Number Two, which
Yep.
sounds very interesting,
Yeah.
about a jury member who realizes that he's the one who actually committed the crime.
Interesting.
I think
Yep.
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But Clint Eastwood, man, a great body of work. Like he's a great actor, great filmmaker. He was always told he was too quiet. He would never make it as an actor. And then look where he is. Look what he's able to accomplish. It's amazing.
Yeah. Clint Eastwood was, I wouldn't say, he's on the level of like Robin Williams, like actors that I watched, Robert De Niro that I watched and got attached to, that kind of thing. Clint Eastwood has just always been there. And yeah, I've always been familiar with his westerns. I like that he's kind of the antithesis of John Wayne, even though John Wayne did some very kind of heady stuff. And John Wayne's best stuff is stuff like Stagecoach, which he's just good at being a matinee idol, right? The Searchers, which kind of really dives into stuff. Red River. John Wayne can be great, but most of the time he played like just the raw, like this is the rules you should follow, like be an American kind of thing, be a great man. And Eastwood was kind of, the Man with No Name was a little bit darker, it was a little bit anti-hero-ish. I think a lot of people became familiar with the term anti-hero with Dirty Harry. Like that
Hmm.
really nailed that. And yeah, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, that's has to be in my top 5 or top 10 westerns, right? I know it's Quentin Tarantino is one of his favorite movies, if not his most favorite. I like High Plains Drifter a lot. The idea of a ghost that wanders in town, kind of wreaking vengeance on everybody, that kind of thing. And I think so. Yeah, I'm familiar with his westerns, but Unforgiven, I think, is my favorite Eastwood
Yeah, I like
because
that one.
it's like the culmination of his career. I know he sat on the David Webb People script. Maybe we don't want to go full bore into Unforgiven because if we see back in the '90s movies, that might be
We
one we
might
want to
talk
chat.
about it.
But it's like I like it as a culmination of his Western career, and he sat on it long enough that okay, I'm mature enough that I can make this movie as kind of like a grand end to my career, kind of a swan song to it. And I just think it's masterfully done as a Western. And so, yeah, it doesn't define Westerns or anything. I just think it's really well done and it defines a career. And I just love everything about it. But yeah, Eastwood, he's Letters from Iwo Jima is just, and that 1-2 punch of that with Flags of Our Fathers is just great. Even though I think Letters from Iwo Jima is a much better movie, less on the nose kind of thing. I think it's a very elegant, kind of poetic thing with the Ken Watanabe character. So yeah, he's done a lot of A lot of great stuff. And I know he's getting into trouble with his conservative views, but once you get old enough, it's like, who cares anymore? Like, I'm too old. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, he's, like I said, Eastwood's not really heavy, but he's been in my movie watching diet so long that it's
Yeah.
just, he's movies to me. So
Yeah, I do remember you went and saw Bridges of Madison County without me. And after I saw it, I was like, yeah, I don't mind seeing that. Him seeing that without me. That was
yeah,
like I could miss that one.
yeah. That was a big one too, because that was him being a romantic, right? I like
Yeah.
that he followed up Unforgiven with The Perfect World, which is a not a perfect movie, even though it's called The Perfect World, but it's fascinating and has one of the best Kevin Costner performances ever. So I think
Well,
Perfect World is one of those movies that gets better with age.
Perfect World. Yeah, I love that one. And you know what's funny? There's a movie that I mentioned before. I read a book once just on a whim because it was sitting there and I just grabbed it and started reading it. It's Bloodwork. And after I finished it, I was like, I should adapt this to a screenplay. And then next thing you know, I was watching TV and this trailer came on for Bloodwork. And I was
Oh.
like, what? Clint Eastwood thought of it first? And I was like, dang it. But what's funny is the character in the book does not look like Clint Eastwood. And so it was always hard for me to watch the movie knowing it was Clint Eastwood playing the part when that's nothing like what the character was.
Right.
It's kind of like Tom Cruise playing, what's his name? Reacher, Jack
Yeah,
Reacher. It's like,
yeah, yeah.
that's not what Jack
That's
Reacher
how he
looks
was
like.
described. I also liked in Absolute Power how his character in the book gets killed halfway through, and it's the Ed Harris character is actually the protagonist.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
movie goes off the rails because Eastwood, you can't kill Eastwood, and so it just kind of throws everything off balance.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
was that was a
And of
fun
course,
movie.
In Line of Fire, I love watching Line of Fire.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Well, I guess the last thing for to kind of bring it back to Dirty Harry and kind of close out is a lot of the essays that I read. It quoted that Jack Nicholson monologue from A Few Good Men,
yeah,
where it's like deep down in places you don't want to talk about at parties. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall, right?
yep,
But in A Few Good Men, Jessup makes a point, but he's also the villain. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So it kind of has that same kind of attitude. I like that we're watching a lot of 70s movies, Johnny. I think the 70s might be one of the most important decades ever for film, because yeah, we grew up in the 90s, but I think 90s movies, they changed us, where I think watching 70s movies, 70s changed cinema in so many ways
yeah,
that it's just fascinating. And I love that these movies are reverberating in the movies we're watching today. That's how you know that they've made a stamp.
yeah,
And Ron Howard, John McTiernan for their movies. I don't know if they realize they're pulling from Dirty Harry, but they do, whether they meant to or not. It's just
yeah.
it's
They're
the same
definitely
thing.
influenced by it. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
same thing with Spielberg and Lucas and Scorsese and Coppola, just taking all the gangster and horror movies and sci-fi stuff from their childhoods and just giving it a new spin. It's like it's fascinating watching these things repeat, and I love that Dirty Harry fits into that kind of niche.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, if that's it, that'll do it for Dirty Harry. Okay, so what's next?
okay, well, we've talked to our friend Kevin Brackett before, who runs the Real Spoilers podcast. We had him on for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They've also got Joe Batiste and Tom O'Keefe, who also co-host over there. And I've been meaning to have them on. I've talked to Joe, I've talked to Tom, and I think Tom was the one I first solidified something with. So he and I are, and maybe you, are probably the oldest podcasters out there. And it's funny because whenever they do like retrospectives and things like that, Tom is always like, oh, this movie from the 70s was great, or stuff before Kevin and Joe's time, right? He's always one that brings those up. So I chatted with him and gave him a list of movies that maybe wanted to cover for 70s Palooza, and out of the ones he chose, I decided Dog Day Afternoon,
Okay.
1975, Sidney Lumet. How do we pronounce it during Death Trap?
Is
Lumet,
it not
Lumet.
Lumet? I thought it was Lumet.
Anyway, Al Pacino, the great Al Pacino, the even greater John Cazale, are in that. Again, it's a comedy thriller, that kind of thing. A lot more disillusionment again with the
Yeah.
70s. But I thought that would. I've never seen Dog Day Afternoon. I've got it. It's back there. It's right next to Dirty Harry. So why not
That's
do that
funny.
one next with
There's
Tom
a lot that
O'Keefe
you
in it?
own that you haven't seen.
Yeah, I know, right? Just because somebody said it was important, so yeah, sure, I'll get it.
Yeah.
So again, Tom O'Keefe from Real Spoilers. We're going to be happy to have him on for conversation about Dog Day Afternoon.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Well, then for NostalgiaCast, I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lumberg.
And of course, we're going to do it.
Yeah, have
Right.
to.
Yeah.
I know what you're thinking. Did I fire 6 shots or 5?
And you got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
That was a good impression.
Oh, thanks.